All right, video 2, part 2. We're still talking about some cool production techniques and mixing techniques, and we're still referencing my song "Storm Cloud Bioluminescence" from my album Void Journal, and we talked about the vocal mix before of having a quietly performed dry vocal take mixed on top of a loudly performed, reverbed out vocal take. Loved that vocal sound. Before we move on to distortion, I want to tell you that you can do that in Pro Tools, especially you who are going into recording 2. You should be learning how to do this in recording 2 with Morgan. You can create that. So I talked about how we sent my voice to that reverb box. In Pro Tools, if you want to create a reverb, one amazing way to do it is you go to create a new track, and what you do is you create what's called an aux input track. And that's basically creates like a little room, almost like a little digital space that you can send elements of sound to. So what you do is you create an aux input track, you make it stereo, create that track, and then on that track you can add a plugin. It could be a reverb or a delay, right? Then what you do is this thing that's called sending using a bus. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to, let's say we want to send the vocal track into that aux input. We go over to the vocal track, and in that area of Pro Tools where you add your plugins, that area that's called inserts, near or below that there's another one that looks like it, and instead of inserts it's called sends. So what you do is you click that area and you create a send. You route that send via a bus to the aux input. So I'll slow down a little bit here. The aux input, what you want to do on there is change its input to a bus. I always just randomly select bus 7/8 for some reason. So you change the aux input track, stereo aux input track, you change its input to bus 7/8. Now that is ready to go, and you have a reverb plugin on that aux input, and there's your kind of little reverb world you can send things to. Then over on your vocal track, in that section I was just talking about, you click sends, and when you click a send, you tell Pro Tools to decide where it's sending that, and you select bus 7/8. So the input of the aux input is bus 7/8. So you're going to send a signal from your vocal track through bus 7/8 to that aux input. Now it's going to have some reverb happening. And now you'll notice too, you can control the volume of the vocal track itself, and using that send fader, you can control how much of the sound you're sending into the reverb world. So you can do that without those cool analog boxes that Ian had right in Pro Tools using buses, sends, and aux inputs. I hope you get more into that with recording 2 with Morgan. I'm sure you will. So now I want to talk about distortion real quick. So let's reference that song, Storm Cloud / Bioluminescence. The first thing you hear is the drums, and they sound crunchy. Here's another great audio engineer word. They sound crunchy, they sound dingy, they sound blown out, and that's distortion. So we owe all rock and roll guitar sounds to distortion. Distortion is something that was kind of invented by accident, by like having things being too loud and peaking. You don't want to create distortion that way. You can really mess up some stuff. But you can add distortion plugins in Pro Tools. There are distortion pedals for guitar that you can use with anything that plugs in via 1/4" cable. And so distortion is basically like controlled chaos of staticky noise, like a noisy, grungy, crunchy character that you can add to any sound. So what I wanted for this song is I wanted to distort the drums, which is unusual, but I really wanted to create a distorted drum sound. And so what we ended up doing at Ian Gorman's studio, La Luna Recording and Sound, is I had previously recorded my drum performance at Benzito's studio. We talked to both of these guys. So I recorded the drums at Benzito's studio. We brought that recording into La Luna Recording and Sound, where I was finishing up the album. And what we did is we took that drum mix and we took all of the tracks of the drums, snare drum track, bass drum track, and the overheads, and we took that, and what Ian did is he sent it into what's called, well, I guess this was just a compressor. He first sent it into a compressor, and out of that compressor, he really like cranked the output of how much he was going to send out of the compressor, and he sent that signal into what's called a limiter. So a limiter is like, for lack of a better description, a limiter is like a much more hardcore compressor that has a much more set boundary of how loud things can get. So what we did is we took that compressor, blasted the output, but sent it into this limiter. So we drove that sound as hard as it could go against this limit. That's why it's called a limiter. And it just crushed it. It just distorted it so much. But then he could take the output of that limiter and make sure that it wasn't peaking coming back into Pro Tools, right? So you're basically controlled peaking something. You're basically distorting it on purpose using too much volume. But you got to know what you're doing, because you don't want to just try to do this at the recording booth in Aquinas with the gear we have there and just like blast your volume too high. It's just going to be messy and awful for your ears. But when you know what you're doing, you can take these multiple pieces of gear and create this distortion. So check out that track and just listen to that crunchy drum sound. Let me know if you have questions about it and how distortion works. If you're in Pro Tools messing with your final projects, try this plugin. It's called Sans Amp. Go to your inserts on whatever track you're trying to distort and add this plugin. It's called Sans Amp. It's a very easy intro distortion to understand because it's got multiple little knobs, almost like a guitar amp, and you can dial in the different parts of distortion and see what it does. I've said a few times, experimenting with sound is so much of how I learned about production. So please do experiment if you have time. Plan extra time into your final projects to be able to experiment with plugins and fun stuff like that, because the more you experiment, the more you learn what works and what doesn't, and the more you learn that way. It was a great way for me to learn. So yeah, we talked about reverb and delay, we talked about distortion, and I'm just going to do one more little video wrap up here for this little video session, and we'll talk to y'all soon.